Hey there, this is Mrs. Mathis, and today I want to evaluate some science resources you might use when you're researching a science topic. Now, these are my own rankings, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on them if you agree or if you disagree. So, when you want to know something about science, you probably Google it. Or if you're really fancy, you might use scholar.google.com or a journal search engine. And I definitely recommend using journal search engines if you want to find primary science resources. When you search a topic, you're going to find a wealth of information, a ton of links, and many formats of information. But how do you know what's worth clicking on? I'm going to rank some science resources today, including science journals, science magazines, textbooks, science associations and what they publish, mainstream news outlets, YouTube videos, podcasts, interviews, lectures, panels, conferences, Wikipedia, non-science magazines and blogs, social media, conspiracy websites, alternative medicine websites, clinic websites, and government science websites. So here's the ranking system, and if you've never seen a ranking system like this before, I'm going to just quick explain it. So S tier is the best. So these are going to be our best resources, most reliable. And then F, all the way down, they kind of go down in descending order to F being, this is total garbage, just don't even listen to a word they say. Okay? So I'm going to start with the S tier. And then I'll go down from there. And there's two at the end that kind of fit multiple tiers, so I'm going to save those for last. So let's start with S tier. These are the ones where you can basically, this is word for word, this is the best resource you're going to use. Scientists use these resources. They're a little bit harder to understand than some of the other ones, but it's the best, okay? So the two things I'm going to put in S tier are science journals and reliable science associations. Okay, so science journals like Nature Review or like Psychology, whatever journal, Frontiers journal, any of those where it's like it's a established science journal where they put articles written by scientists about their research. That's the best because you're hearing it straight from the scientist. And not only are you hearing it straight from the scientist, but their work has been reviewed by other scientists before it gets published. The process to get published in one of these journals, you have to first do a lot of research and experimentation, observations, record a ton of data, and then you have to create an article about your research. And that format of that's going to look different for every journal, but basically it's going to go through, the background information, your materials and methods, what you did, and your results, what you found, the data, and then a conclusion kind of explaining the results. So that's like a basic science paper. Those are the best. And in order to get into one of these journals, so once you've done your research, you've written your paper about it, you have to go through a review process, and it gets reviewed by other scientists in your field, the best of the best, and it gets reviewed by the people working for the journal. You don't just get to publish something, okay? So that's why these are such a great resource. They've been like triple checked, and they're written by scientists about their research. And associations are kind of along that same vein. They're not going to discuss or talk about anything that hasn't been heavily researched. And they are associations of scientists working in the field. So those are the two best, and the associations often also have their own journals. So if you want good information, the best information, go here first. But I also know that sometimes stuff written by these associations and in these journal articles is a little above what you can understand. And that doesn't mean that you're not smart, but even if it's an area of science that you're just not as good in, you might not understand the journal articles. Like I don't understand astrophysics. I'm not going to go to these resources to learn about astrophysics unless I've already done a lot of research from other easier resources first. Okay, so I'm going to go to B tier next. And these are generally like very accurate, but maybe they are a little bit vaguer. They aren't as detailed. There could be some misunderstanding of the reader about the topic because it doesn't have as much detail. It's not straight from the scientist. For A tier, or maybe it is straight from the scientist, but it hasn't been reviewed by other scientists. So what I'm going to put in A tier are two things. I'm going to put clinic websites in A tier. And I know I chose Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic's actually more of an S tier resource, but because it's not the only clinic with a website, I'm putting it in A tier. Now, most clinics, most like major hospitals, on their websites, there is not going to be any inaccurate information. It's going to be easier to read for the average person. But there are some clinics that aren't quite S tier with their information. And so that's why this is an A rather than S. Another one I'm going to put in A tier are quotes from scientists about their own research. So this kind of covers all panels, interviews, lectures, science debates, like all that stuff kind of goes here if it's from the scientist who did the research. Okay. And the only reason this isn't S tier, because it really is like it's going to be accurate information, but it's coming from the scientist who did the research. The only reason it's not S tier is because when they're just speaking off the cuff, that's what they're saying is not being reviewed by anybody else. They're just saying it. So they could possibly have an incorrect conclusion from their data that they're talking about that wouldn't have popped up if somebody else had reviewed it and said, no, I don't think this is quite right. So these are the best. If you can start here with these, then that's going to be your best information. So now I'll go to B tier. I got a little confused earlier. Now we're on B tier. So B tier, this is also going to be pretty accurate information, but this is definitely going to be more on the less detailed, vague side, and possibly slight misinterpretations. Possibly. And so what I'm going to put here are science magazines. Okay. And when I'm saying science magazines, I mean like established, they have a good reputation, they've been around for a while, they report on the newest information, they have a diverse range of information and different scientists. So that's why I'm putting these in B tier. It's usually accurate. Sometimes there are some slight misinterpretations because the person writing the article is not the scientist who did the research. There's somebody who probably knows a lot about science, and they've read the article, and they might have even interviewed the scientists who did the research, and they're just explaining to the public what they learned from that. So it's a secondary resource. But again, if it's an established magazine, it's probably pretty good. Of course, there are some magazines out there that sort of call themselves science magazines, but they're actually more of a C or D tier or even totally false magazine. So just check the background for that publication. I'm also going to put textbooks here. Now, some people might disagree and go, oh, if it's in a textbook, that should be S tier, right? Because they only publish the best of the best in a textbook. And I actually have to disagree here for a few reasons. One is that a textbook is generally written by like maybe 1 to 6 authors. So, and it is reviewed by the textbook company, and they probably are talking with people that they have worked with in the past. And generally the information is pretty accurate, but every once in a while, an inaccuracy will slip by that wouldn't have slipped by in like a science journal. And then the other thing with textbooks is that they're, due to the nature of them, taking time to create and put together, they tend to be outdated. So by the time a science textbook is actually published, there's already new research about the area that's not going to be included in the textbook. So that's why it's B tier. 99.9% of the time, totally accurate, maybe a little bit outdated, and then just like every once in a while you get an inaccuracy. And of course, textbooks vary in quality as well. So, do your research, make sure it's a reliable textbook. The last one I'm going to put into B tier is government science organizations. And again, the scientists working for these organizations probably have publications that are up in the S tier level. They might work for clinics, or they might have done panel discussions and their information is in the A tier level. But by the time it's on a government website, there is going to be some, even if it's minute, amount of bias. Okay, because you have to remember that our government is not unbiased, right? There's nothing apolitical about a government. A government is political. And so are their organizations, even if they are created with the intent of being unbiased. There's still going to be some bias that slips in. Again, the scientists who work for these organizations are probably the best of the best, trying to do unbiased research and present that in a good way. But we know that there is some political control over what gets talked about on these websites. So that's why that goes more into B tier. And then in C tier, so this is like sort of middle of the road. It might be accurate, it might be inaccurate. But generally pretty decent. And I would say Wikipedia goes right here. Okay. If it is an older article that lots of people have edited and it's very popular and it has references for every single claim that's made in it, every single evidence that's cited, then it's probably a very good article. Now, if you're writing a science paper, you still don't want to reference it. You're going to want to reference the references that they used to write the article, which are at the bottom of the article. But it's a great place to start if you want to learn more. Just make sure that you don't stop your research here. You follow up on it. Also, there are some Wikipedia articles, if it's newer, it hasn't been edited by a lot of people, it doesn't have decent references, it doesn't have a lot of references. Some Wikipedia articles are going to be much worse than others. So just use your judgment and don't stop with the article. Look other places too. And then in my D ranking, I'm going to put one thing here, and that is mainstream news outlets. Now, some of you may say, oh, well, how is Wikipedia better than a mainstream news outlet? Well, Wikipedia is better because it's not totally biased. Okay? A mainstream news outlet, on the other hand, we know they're biased. We know they're political, and we know that they have agendas in what they want to tell people. Okay, and I don't care if it's left or right. If they have an agenda, they're going to invite certain scientists to talk because they know that that scientist is going to say something they agree with. They're going to cherry pick their data. They're not going to use a lot of data points. They're just going to use whatever fits their narrative. And sometimes that will mean like a great scientist will go on and it'll be a good interview. But you're going to want to follow up on anything you hear from these mainstream news outlets. Even ones that you don't think are too biased, follow up on it because there are probably other scientists who disagree with them. You want to know kind of what the ratio is. Do most scientists agree with this? What is most of the research saying? Did they just cherry pick the one scientist that believes that, excessive eating of sugar doesn't cause obesity? So just really, you have to follow up. You cannot stop with these resources. Below mainstream news outlets, so even worse, would be and sometimes these are better, but I will say that most of the time they're worse, non-science magazines and blogs. So these are like Vogue, Men's Health, Women's Health, whatever magazine you can find at the grocery store, basically. Just not good resources. And they will sometimes publish articles that are meant to sound science-y, so they'll use, a chemical name, or they'll talk about muscle building or immune systems. And so they'll use like science language, but that doesn't mean that they actually know what they're talking about. They're just using buzzwords to make you think they know what they're talking about. Occasionally, they will, like, I'll read one of these non-science magazines, and they will actually like have an interview with multiple real, like, well-known scientists in the field talking about something. And in that scenario, we're looking more at like, okay, this level, right? Because we're looking at real scientists talking about their research. So if you're reading an article and they've got like 5 dermatologists talking about causes of acne, double check the dermatologist, but that's a better article, but that's not what happens most of the time. Most of the time, they're just trying to sell a product to you, and they're going to use whatever science-y language they can to make it sound like they know what they're talking about. Another one I'm going to put in this E tier is social media. Okay, again, social media. Every once in a while, you'll find a rare gem, somebody who knows what they're talking about, who has done research in the field or whatever, and they have posted something on their social media. That's not what actually happens 90% of the time. It's just people contradicting each other with like wild claims and no evidence or reasoning to back it up. So just if you see something on social media, there's no problem with like looking at it and following up on it, but like it's probably either not true or misinterpreted or exaggerated. And then the last one that I'm going to put into E tier, which is, E tier is like probably false or contains false information. You have to follow it up. The other one I'm going to put into E tier is alternative medicine websites and publications. So if you see any sort of claim about essential oils fixing, COVID, or homeopathy solving cancer, or herbalism, all these things, it's like 99% garbage, with 1% every once in a while they'll touch on something that's actually real and researched. And what's tricky about these is they'll put people like this, like people that look like a doctor, like, oh my gosh, he knows what he's talking about, he's got a stethoscope. No, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So he's just trying to, sell his brand of care. Just because it has somebody in a lab coat on the cover, and they use sciencey words, and they use words that you like to hear, like natural, no chemicals, no animal byproducts. Like, don't fall for that. It's just lip service to get you to listen to what they want to say. They're not going to use any real researched science. They're not going to cite journal articles. Their doctors aren't going to be people who are like, and sometimes they even call people who are doctors who don't even have an MD. They just have they went to some weird school that some random person created, and then they call their graduates doctors, but all they do is like give you massages. I don't know. It's mostly garbage. I will say there is a difference between like alternative homeopathy, like hippie BS, and actual traditional medicine that has basis in science and fact. That is a different ballpark that I am not even qualified to talk about. But they're like, you can kind of tell the difference. If they are talking about things that you can look up and you can find journal articles about, it's different. But 99% of the time, they are not. They are just randomly spouting off their ideas that have no basis whatsoever in real fact. And then at the bottom tier, of course, goes the conspiracies and far right or far left wing, like political websites. Okay, so if it's some sort of crazy website that's like literally made for this like really extremist agenda, or it's basically just conspiracies, just don't even go there. Like you're not even gonna get 1% of truth from most of these places. And I'm not gonna say that conspiracy theories as a whole are bad, or they don't ever contribute anything real, because the actual idea of a conspiracy theory, like that could be a whole other video. But what I am going to say is that almost 100% of the time, it's just crap, okay? So just stay away from this stuff. It's not going to be good. And then the two left over I have are YouTube and podcasts. And I know I use the Science Friday logo. Science Friday is actually a really great podcast. That would be up here somewhere. But I'm just going to speak in general about podcasts. Let's do podcasts first. Okay, so podcasts, right, can be anywhere from A tier, where you've got actual scientists who did the research going on and being interviewed, all the way down to Crazy Carl in his mom's basement talking about don't lick toads because they'll give you rainbow farts. Okay, so really a huge range here. Just use what I've already talked about and use your skills to figure out who is on the podcast. Did they do the research? Like, what are they talking about? If this was a publication instead of a podcast, where would it get categorized here? And YouTube is the exact same. Again, if it is an interview with somebody who is a scientist who did the research, or if it's a video of a science conference or a panel discussion, that's really good material. Again, if it's a YouTube video of Joe Schmo talking about his grandma's bunions, that's F level, okay? So these are my rankings. I hope this was helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Always evaluate your resources and use more than one. And good luck learning more science.